The smell of hay and warm milk was already familiar to Clara Bennett's hands when most decent folk were still lost in dreams. But on this particular October morning in 1882, she sensed someone watching her from the barn entrance as she pressed her forehead against Daisy's flank and worked the steady rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. She was 22 years old and had been running her father's ranch outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming territory for 3 years now, ever since a fever took him during a brutal winter. Her mother had passed when Clara was just a girl, leaving her with memories more precious than gold and a stubborn determination that made grown men twice her age step back in respect. The Bennett Ranch was small compared to the sprawling cattle operations that dotted the grasslands, but it was hers, and she would die before letting it fall to ruin or into the hands of Martin Cresswell, the banker who had been circling like a vulture ever since her father's death, offering to help by buying her out for a fraction of what the land was worth. "You're up early," a man's voice said, low and careful, as if he did not want to startle her or the cows. Clara did not stop milking, though her heart kicked against her ribs. She had learned long ago not to show fear, especially not to strange men who appeared in her barn before sunrise. "Same time I am up every morning. Question is, what are you doing on my property?" "Looking for work." He stepped into the lantern light, and Clara risked a glance. He was tall, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a face that was handsome in a worn, weather-beaten way. His hat was dusty. His clothes showed the miles he had traveled, and his eyes were the color of winter sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26. "Name is James Cord. I heard in town you might need help with the ranch." "Heard wrong," Clara said, though it was a lie. She needed help desperately. 2 of her 3 ranch hands had left last month for better-paying work on the big spreads, and old Timothy was barely able to keep up with the daily demands. But hiring a stranger was dangerous, especially a man who looked like he could handle himself in a fight and might have reasons for drifting through Wyoming territory without ties. "I work hard, do not drink much, and I know cattle and horses better than most," James said. He did not move closer, which Clara appreciated. "I can fix fences, break horses, handle the rough stock, whatever you need." Clara finished with Daisy and moved to the next cow, a temperamental heifer named Buttercup, who only tolerated Clara's touch. Why would a man who knows cattle and horses need to beg for work from a woman barely keeping her head above water? Big ranches are always hiring. "Maybe I do not want to work for a big ranch." His voice had an edge now, something that suggested a story he was not ready to tell. "Maybe I prefer honest work for honest people." She could have sent him away. Should have, probably. But the mortgage payment was due in 2 months, and she needed to get her cattle to market before the snows came. She needed help, and something in James Cord's eyes told her he was not the kind of man who would hurt a woman or steal from her in the night. $5 a month, food, and a bunk in the hired hand's cabin," she said. "You work dawn until the work is done. No drinking, no gambling, no bringing trouble to my door. I catch you stealing or lying, you leave with nothing, understood?" "Understood." He almost smiled. "When do I start?" "Right now. There is another bucket over there. Rosie is the brown one in the corner. She kicks, so watch yourself." James picked up the bucket and moved with an easy grace toward Rosie, speaking soft words to her before he settled on the stool. Clara watched from the corner of her eye as he began to milk with practiced hands, steady and sure. Rosie, who had kicked old Timothy twice just last week, stood calm and placid. They worked in silence as the darkness outside slowly turned gray. Clara found herself aware of his presence in a way that made her uncomfortable, not from fear, but from something else entirely, something that made her skin feel too tight and her breath come a little faster. She focused on the work, on the familiar sounds of milk streaming into the pail and the soft breathing of the cows. By the time they finished, the eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, that deep blue of pre-dawn that promised sunrise. Clara carried the full milk pails to the cooling shed, And when she emerged, James was standing in the yard looking toward the east where the sky was turning pink and gold. "Best part of the day," he said quietly. Clara came to stand beside him, keeping a proper distance but drawn nonetheless to the view. The ranch sat on a gentle rise, and from here she could see across the rolling grassland to the mountains in the distance. The sunrise over Wyoming territory was something that never failed to move her, the way the light spread like fire across the land, turning everything golden and new. "My father used to say that every sunrise is a promise," Clara said, surprising herself by speaking at all. "A chance to start fresh, to do better than you did the day before." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." She felt the familiar ache in her chest, the grief that never quite left even after 3 years. He would have been 53 this past summer, built this ranch from nothing but grit and determination. Seems like he passed those qualities on to his daughter. Clara glanced at James, but he was still watching the sunrise, his profile etched against the growing light. There was something peaceful about him in this moment, something that eased the constant tension she carried in her shoulders. "I should start breakfast," she said, breaking the spell. "You can wash up at the pump. Meet me in the house in 10 minutes. She walked away before he could respond, before she could start wondering why her heart was beating so fast or why she felt like something significant had just shifted in her carefully ordered world. Over the next week, Clara learned that James Cord was a man of his word. He worked harder than any hand she had ever employed up before dawn, and still mending tack or fixing fence posts long after the sun went down. He was quiet but not unfriendly, and old Timothy took to him immediately, declaring over supper one night that James knew more about horses than any man he had met in 40 years of ranch work. Every morning, James appeared in the barn just as Clara was settling down to milk the first cow. He never spoke much, just picked up a bucket and got to work. But his presence became something she looked forward to, a companionship that required no words or explanations. When they finished, they would walk out into the yard together and watch the sun rise, standing close enough that she could smell the soap he used and the scent of hay that clung to his clothes. On the 8th morning, as the sky turned from gray to rose, James finally broke the comfortable silence. "I was not entirely honest with you," he said. Clara's stomach tightened. "About what?" "About why I needed work." He turned to face her, and in the soft light, she could see the tension in his jaw. 3 years ago, I had my own place down in Colorado. Small spread, but it was mine. I was engaged to marry a woman from town, daughter of the feed store owner. Everything was set. The life I thought I wanted. Clara waited, knowing there was more, knowing it would not be easy for him to tell it. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found her in the barn with my business partner, a man I had known since we were boys. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "I did not hurt them, though God knows I wanted to. I just left. Sold my half of the ranch to my partner for whatever he would pay, which was not much, and I started drifting. Been moving from place to place ever since, working where I could, trying to figure out who I am when everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie." "I am sorry," Clara said, and meant it. She understood betrayal, understood how it could hollow you out and make you question everything. That must have been terrible. "The worst part was not the betrayal," James said. "It was realizing I did not actually love her, not the way a man should love the woman he is going to marry. I was more angry about my partner's duplicity than about losing her. What kind of man does that make me?" "An honest one," Clara said. "Plenty of people marry for reasons that have nothing to do with love. At least you're willing to admit the truth to yourself." "Have you ever been in love?" he asked, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, that was too forward." "No, it is all right." Clara watched as the sun broke over the horizon, spilling light across the land. "I thought I was once, when I was 19. Ranch hand who worked for my father, handsome as sin, and could charm the birds from the trees. I was fool enough to believe him when he said he loved me, that he wanted to marry me and help run the ranch. What happened? My father got sick, and and suddenly the ranch did not look like such a good prospect. He left for Texas before my father was even in the ground. She smiled, but it was bitter. Taught me a valuable lesson about trusting pretty words. Not all men are like that. I know. She did know, especially now, watching James's face in the sunrise light and seeing nothing but sincerity there. But it makes it hard to trust, to let anyone close. I understand that better than you might think. They stood in silence for a moment, and Clara felt something settling between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both wounded, both wary, both trying to find their way in a world that had proven itself to be harder and crueler than they had expected. I should feed the chicken, Clara said finally, reluctantly, and I need to ride out and check the south fence line. James settled his hat on his head. Thank you for listening. I have not told anyone about what happened before now. Thank you for being honest with me, Clara said. It means something. She watched him walk toward the stable, his long stride eating up the ground, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This was dangerous, she told herself. She could not afford to feel anything for James Cord beyond gratitude for his good work. Her ranch, her survival, depended on her keeping her focus, not getting distracted by a drifter with sad eyes and gentle hands. But as the days passed and turned into weeks, Clara found it increasingly difficult to maintain that distance. James was always there, steady and reliable, working beside her in the barn before dawn, watching the sunrise with her in comfortable silence, or sometimes talking about small things, his childhood in Kansas, his mother's apple pie recipe, the way his father had taught him to gentle horses instead of breaking them. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she least expected it. She learned that he read books, rare for a ranch hand, and that he had strong opinions about everything from politics to the best way to shoe a horse. She learned that he was kind, not just to her but to everyone, that he treated old Timothy with respect and even the most difficult cattle with patience. And she learned that she was falling in love with him, truly in love, in a way that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. It was late November when Martin Cresswell rode out to the ranch, bringing his smug smile and oily manner into Clara's kitchen like he owned the place. She had been baking bread, and her hands were still dusted with flour when he pushed his way in without invitation. Miss Bennett itikfer, he said, removing his expensive hat and setting it on her table like he had every right. I hope I am not interrupting. You are, Clara said flatly. What do you want, Mr. Cresswell? Direct as always. I admire that about you. He did not look like he admired anything except the prospect of getting her land. I came to discuss your mortgage payment, which I believe is due next week. It is due in 10 days and I will have it. Will you? He raised an eyebrow. Because I have heard through various channels that you have not yet sold your cattle, and winter is coming on fast. It would be a shame if you were unable to make your payment after working so hard to keep this place running. I will have your money, Clara said through gritted teeth. Is there anything else? Actually, yes. Cresswell leaned against her counter with a familiarity that made her want to grab the iron skillet and chase him out. I have been thinking that perhaps we could come to an arrangement that would be beneficial to both of us. I am not interested in selling. I am not talking about selling. His smile widened. I am talking about marriage, Miss Bennett. You need security, financial backing, someone to help you manage this ranch. I need a wife, and I have always admired your spirit. Think about it. You could keep your ranch, I would forgive your debts, and we could build something substantial together. Clara stared at him, momentarily speechless with shock and disgust. Martin Cresswell was nearly 50 years old, soft around the middle, and had a reputation in town for sharp dealing and cruelty to anyone he considered beneath him. The idea of being married to him, of allowing him to touch her, made her skin crawl. Get out, she said quietly. Now, Miss Bennett, do not be hasty. Think about what I'm offering. I said get out. Clara's voice rose, and she grabbed the rolling pin from the counter. Get out of my house right now, or I swear I will crack your skull open." The kitchen door opened behind Cresswell, and James stepped in, his presence suddenly filling the room with a different kind of energy. He looked at Clara's raised rolling pin, at Cresswell's red face, and his expression went hard as granite. "The lady asked you to leave," James said, his voice low and dangerous. "I suggest you do it." Cresswell turned, taking in James's size and the set of his shoulders, and whatever he saw there made him take a step back. "This is none of your concern, ranch hand. This is between me and Miss Bennett." "Wrong. Anything that concerns Miss Bennett concerns me." James moved forward, not threatening but implacable. "You are not welcome here. Leave now while you still can." For a moment Clara thought Cresswell would argue, but something in James's eyes convinced him otherwise. He grabbed his hat and moved toward the door, turning back to spit his parting words. "You are making a mistake, Miss Bennett. When you cannot make your payment, do not come crying to me for mercy. And you," he jabbed a finger at James, "you will regret threatening me." He slammed out, and they heard his horse gallop away. Clara set down the rolling pin with shaking hands, her whole body trembling with anger and residual fear. "Are you all right?" James asked, coming to stand beside her. "He wanted to marry me," Clara said, her voice strangled. "That horrible man actually thought I would marry him to save my ranch." "Would you?" James's voice was carefully neutral. "Marry someone to save this place?" Clara looked up at him, seeing the tension in his face, the way he held himself rigid, as if bracing for a blow. "No," she said firmly. "I would rather lose everything than tie myself to a man like that. I would rather work myself to death trying to save this place on my own than give up my freedom and self-respect." Something in James's expression eased. "He will make trouble for you now. Men like that do not forget being humiliated." "I know." Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "But I could not stomach it, James. I could not even pretend to consider it." James pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, close enough that their knees almost touched. "What if you did not have to face him alone? What if you had someone standing with you? Someone who would not let him or anyone else push you around?" "I have you and Timothy," Clara said. "You both have been wonderful." "I do not mean as a hired hand." James took a breath, and Clara saw his hands clench on his thighs. "I mean as a husband." The world seemed to stop spinning. Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," James said. And now he turned to face her fully, his winter sky eyes intense and serious. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have no reason to trust me with something so important, but I care about you, Clara. These past weeks, working beside you, watching the sunrise with you, learning who you are, I have come to care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone. I am not asking you to love me, though God knows I would hope that might come in time. I am asking you to let me stand with you to help you save this ranch and build something real together." Clara's mind was reeling. "James, I cannot ask you to do that. Marriage is not something to be entered into lightly, not even to save a ranch." "I am not suggesting we enter into it lightly," James said. "I am suggesting we enter into it honestly. Two people who respect each other and want the same things, who could maybe build something good together if given the chance." "You do not love me," Clara said, though the words hurt to speak. "Do I not?" James reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Maybe I do not know what love is supposed to feel like, Clara, but I know that I think about you from the moment I wake until I fall asleep. I know that watching you work, seeing your strength and determination, makes me want to be a better man. I know that the thought of Cresswell or anyone else hurting you makes me want to do violence. If that is not love, it is damn close to it." Clara felt tears prickling her eyes. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of trusting again, of believing in something that might turn out to be a lie. I know I'm afraid too." James squeezed her hand gently. "But maybe being afraid together is better than being afraid alone." She looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was stroking over her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. She thought about the mornings in the barn, the comfortable silence, and the easy conversation. She thought about how he made her laugh, how he listened when she talked about her father and her dreams for the ranch. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how right it seemed to have him working beside her. And she thought about how empty the barn would feel if he ever left, how much it would hurt to watch him ride away. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." James's face transformed, his smile so bright and genuine that it took her breath away. "Truly? Truly?" Clara found herself smiling back, feeling something like hope unfurling in her chest. "But I want to be clear about something, James Cord. I am not marrying you just to save the ranch, and I am not marrying you out of desperation. I am marrying you because these past weeks have shown me that you are a good man, an honest man, and because when I think about my future, I want you in it." "Clara." Her name on his lips was reverent. He lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, and the gesture was so old-fashioned and sweet that she felt her throat tighten with emotion. "We should do it soon," she said practically, trying to regain some equilibrium. "Before Cresswell can cause more trouble. We can go into town tomorrow, find the preacher. Tomorrow, then." James stood still holding her hand and pulled her gently to her feet. They stood close, closer than they had ever stood before, and Clara could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you for trusting me. I promise you, I will spend every day proving that your trust is not misplaced." "I believe you," Clara said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. They were married the next afternoon in the small white church in Cheyenne, with old Timothy and the preacher's wife as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that her mother had made years ago, and James had cleaned up until he looked almost like a stranger, his hair damp from washing and his jaw freshly shaved. The ceremony was short, the preacher's words about duty and respect and cleaving together through hardship both comforting and terrifying. When James slipped the simple gold band on her finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and was the only thing of value he owned, Clara felt the weight of what they were doing settle on her shoulders. But when he kissed her, a chaste brush of lips that nonetheless sent heat spiraling through her body, she felt something else too. Hope and possibility and the first fragile beginnings of joy. They signed the marriage certificate, paid the preacher his fee, and rode back to the ranch in the wagon with Timothy snoring in the back. It was late afternoon, the sky already beginning to darken toward evening, and Clara felt suddenly awkward beside the man who was now her husband. "I suppose we should discuss sleeping arrangements," she said, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. "I do not want you to think that I expect, that is, I know this marriage is somewhat unusual, and I do not want to assume—" "Clara," James interrupted gently, "breathe." She did, pulling air into her tight lungs. "I will take whatever you are comfortable with," James continued. "If you want me to stay in the hired hand's cabin until you are ready for more, I will do that. If you want me to sleep in the house but in a separate room, I can do that too. This is your home, and I will not push you into anything you are not ready for." Clara thought about it, about what she wanted versus what she thought she should want. "You could take the spare room upstairs," she said finally, "the one across from mine. That way we are close, but you have your privacy and I have mine, and we can take things slowly." "That sounds perfect." James smiled at her, and some of the tension in her shoulders eased. That night, after supper with Timothy, who kept grinning at them like a fool and making comments about young love, Clara showed James to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the eastern pasture and a bed that her father had built from pine. "Will this do?" she asked, suddenly nervous again. "It is better than any place I have slept in 3 years," James said. He set down his few belongings, everything he owned fitting into a single worn saddlebag, and turned to face her. "Thank you, Clara, for giving me a chance, for trusting me. I know I have not given you many reasons to believe in me, but I will work every day to deserve your faith." "You have given me plenty of reasons," good Clara said. "You are here, are you not? You married me when you could have just ridden on to the next town, the next job. That means something." James crossed the room to stand in front of her, and slowly, giving her time to pull away, he lifted his hands to cup her face. His palms were rough and warm, and Clara found herself leaning into the touch. "Good night, wife," he said softly, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that she felt tears sting her eyes. "Good night, husband," she whispered back. Clara lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone moving around in the room across the hall. She was married. She had a husband. The reality of it kept hitting her in waves, along with a confusion of emotions she could not quite name. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else, a warmth, a sense of rightness, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had made the best decision of her life. The next morning, Clara woke in the dark as always and dressed quickly against the cold. When she came downstairs, she half expected to find the house empty, to discover that James had left in the night, that this had all been some elaborate trick she had been fool enough to fall for. But when she opened the kitchen door, she smelled coffee brewing. And when she stepped outside, she found James already in the barn, sitting on the milking stool beside Daisy, working with his usual steady rhythm. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." Clara picked up her bucket and settled beside Buttercup, feeling something settle in her chest. He had stayed. He was here, and he was working, and maybe everything was going to be all right after all. They milked in comfortable silence, and when they finished, they walked out into the yard together as they always did. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue giving way to gray, and then to the first hints of pink and gold. But this morning, James did not keep the careful distance he had always maintained. Instead, he moved close, wrapped his arm around Clara's shoulders, and pulled her against his side. She stiffened for just a moment, and then relaxed, allowing herself to lean into his warmth and strength. "I have been thinking," James said as they watched the sun begin to rise, "about the cattle and the mortgage payment." "I have been thinking about that too," Clara admitted. "We need to get them to market soon, but the prices in Cheyenne have been terrible. I was considering driving them to Laramie. I heard they are paying better there." "That is a 4-day drive and we would need help," James said. "Timothy is too old for that kind of work, and it is just the two of us." "I know, but what choice do we have? I will not get enough from the Cheyenne buyers to cover the mortgage." "What if I rode ahead, found us some temporary help for the drive? There are always men looking for short-term work this time of year. Cowboys who have been paid off from the big ranches and are looking to earn a little more before winter sets in." Clara considered this. "That could work, but James, I do not have much cash to pay them with." "We will offer them a percentage of the sale," James said. "That way, they have incentive to get the cattle there safely and fetch a good price. It is a risk for them, but the kind of men I am thinking of are used to taking risks." "All right." Clara tipped her head back to look at him. "When would you leave?" "Today, if you can spare me. The sooner we get this organized, the sooner we can get the cattle moved and get Cresswell his money." James's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I do not like leaving you, especially not this soon, but the timing is critical." "I understand. Timothy and I can manage for a few days." Clara tried to sound braver than she felt. The thought of James leaving, even temporarily, made her stomach clench with something that felt suspiciously like fear. "I will be back as soon as I can," James promised. 3 days, 4 at the most. "And Clara?" He turned her to face him, both hands on her shoulders now, his eyes serious. "While I am gone, do not let Cresswell or anyone else onto this property. If there is trouble, you send Timothy into town for the sheriff. Promise me." "I promise." Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of morning stubble under her palm. "Be careful. Always." James leaned down and kissed her, more than the brief touch they had shared at their wedding. A real kiss that made her pulse race and her knees go weak. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with something that made her breath catch. I will come back to you. That is a promise. He left an hour later, riding one of her good horses with enough supplies for a week and what little cash she could spare tucked into his saddlebag. Clara watched him ride away until he was just a dot on the horizon, and then she turned back to the ranch and the endless work that needed doing. The next 3 days were some of the longest of Clara's life. She and Timothy kept the ranch running, feeding and tending the stock, making repairs, preparing for the cattle drive. But every moment, Clara found herself listening for hoofbeats, watching the road, her heart jumping every time she heard a sound that could be James returning. On the third night, she was in the barn checking on a cow that looked like she might calve early when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, and they were coming fast. Clara grabbed the rifle she kept near the barn door and stepped out into the yard, her heart pounding. But it was not Cresswell's men or outlaws come to cause trouble. It was James, riding at the head of a group of 5 cowboys, all of them looking weathered and capable. He swung down from his horse and strode toward her, his face breaking into a smile that made her lower the rifle and forget everything else. "You came back," she said, hating how her voice shook. "I told you I would." James stopped in front of her, and then, apparently not caring that they had an audience, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. "Did you doubt me?" "Maybe a little," Clara admitted when she could breathe again. She was acutely aware of the appreciative whistles and chuckles from the men behind James, and felt her face heat with embarrassment and something else, something warm and giddy. "Well, you can stop doubting now." James turned, keeping one arm around her waist. "Clara, these are the men I told you about. They have all agreed to help us drive the cattle to Laramie for a percentage of the sale. This is Dutch Henriksen, Frank Cole, Jesus Martinez, Tom Brady, and Sam Mitchell. Gentlemen, this is my wife, Clara Cord." The men tipped their hats respectfully, and Clara studied them with a critical eye. They looked honest enough, worn and tired, but with the bearing of men who knew their business. Dutch was older, maybe 40, with a graying beard and kind eyes. Frank and Tom looked like brothers, both young and eager. Jesus had the weathered look of someone who had spent his whole life in the saddle, and Sam was a black man with intelligent eyes and a quiet demeanor that spoke of strength and competence. "You're all welcome here," Clara said. "We can put you up in the bunkhouse, and there is supper waiting in the house. We will plan to leave at first light if that suits everyone." "Suits us just fine, ma'am," Dutch said. "We are grateful for the work." They settled the men in, and over supper they discussed the logistics of the drive. They had 60 head of cattle to move. Not a huge herd, but enough to be challenging with such a small crew. The weather was holding clear, which was a blessing, but they would need to move fast before the snows came. That night, after the men had retired to the bunkhouse and Timothy had gone to his cabin, Clara and James finally had a moment alone. They stood in the kitchen, the lamps burning low, and Clara felt suddenly shy, aware that everything was different now, that they had been apart and now they were together again, and something had shifted between them. "I missed you," she said softly. "I missed you too." James moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Every mile I rode, I kept thinking about you here, working yourself to exhaustion, and I hated being away from you. You were only gone 3 days. 3 days too long." He kissed her, slow and deep, and Clara felt heat bloom through her body. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. "I do not want to sleep across the hall from you tonight, Clara. I want to sleep beside you, to hold you, to wake up with you in my arms. But only if that is what you want too." Clara's heart was racing, her body alive with sensation and wanting. They had known each other less than 2 months, had been married less than a week. By all rights, she should be cautious, should take things slowly, should protect her heart. But she was tired of being cautious. She was tired of being alone. And more than anything, she wanted James Cord, wanted him with a fierceness that took her breath away. "Yes," she said simply. "I want that too." The look on his face was worth everything, every risk, every fear. He took her hand and led her upstairs, and when he closed the bedroom door behind them, Clara felt any lingering doubts disappear. He was gentle with her, patient and tender, taking his time despite the obvious urgency of his need. He kissed her until she was breathless, touched her until she was trembling, and when they finally came together, it was with a rightness that made Clara's eyes sting with tears. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her bed, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. James stroked her hair back from her face, his expression soft in the lamplight. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it is fast, and I know you might not believe me, but I do. I love you, Clara." "I love you too," Clara whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "I think I have loved you since that first morning when you helped me milk the cows and watch the sunrise with me." "Then we are both fools," James said with a smile. "Falling in love this fast, trusting this deeply." "Maybe. But I would rather be a fool with you than wise and alone." He kissed her again, and they made love once more, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and hearts. When Clara finally fell asleep, it was with James's arms around her and a sense of peace she had not felt in years. They left at dawn the next morning, the whole crew working together to move the cattle out of the pastures and onto the trail north toward Laramie. It was hard work, dusty and exhausting, with the cattle balking and trying to scatter at every opportunity. But James and his crew knew what they were doing, and even Clara, who had grown up around cattle, found herself impressed by their skill and coordination. Jesus and Dutch rode point, leading the herd and setting the pace. Frank and Tom worked the flanks, keeping the cattle bunched together, while Sam rode drag in the back, pushing the stragglers forward through the dust. James rode everywhere, checking on the crew, helping where he was needed, always with an eye on Clara to make sure she was managing. Clara rode alongside Timothy in the middle of the herd, and despite the exhaustion and the ache in her back and legs, she felt something like joy. This was her ranch, her cattle, and she was fighting to save it. More than that, she was not alone. She had James and a crew of good men, and for the first time since her father died, she felt like maybe she could actually win this battle. They made good progress the first day, covering nearly 15 miles before they stopped to make camp. The men set up a rough perimeter, and Clara helped cook supper over the open fire, a simple meal of beans and salt pork and coffee strong enough to strip paint. "You have got a good crew," Dutch said to James as they ate, "and a good woman. You are a lucky man, Cord." "Do not I know it," James said, his eyes finding Clara across the fire. She felt her cheeks heat but could not help smiling back. "How long have you two been married?" Frank asked around a mouthful of beans. 6 days, Clara said, and laughed at the shocked expressions on the men's faces. 6 days, and you are already out here driving cattle? Tom shook his head. "That is some honeymoon, ma'am." "We do what we need to do," Clara said with a shrug. "The cattle will not move themselves and the mortgage will not pay itself." "Your ranch?" Sam asked quietly. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her. "My father's ranch, left to me when he died." Clara poked at the fire with a stick. "I have been holding on by my fingernails for 3 years now. This drive is my last chance to save it." "Then we will make sure you get the best price possible," Dutch said firmly, and the other men nodded in agreement. That night, Clara and James spread their bedrolls a little apart from the others, close enough to the fire to stay warm, but far enough away to have some privacy. They lay together under the vast Wyoming sky, looking up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch. "Are you tired?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Exhausted," Clara admitted, "but happy too. Is that strange?" "Not at all." James turned on his side to face her, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw. "I feel the same way. Like everything is right, like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "I am glad you stayed that first morning," Clara said. "I almost sent you away." "I would have kept coming back until you let me stay," James said. The moment I saw you in that barn, so fierce and determined, I knew my drifting days were over. I knew I had found what I had been looking for, even if I did not realize I was looking for it. Clara kissed him soft and sweet, and felt her heart swell with love for this man who had appeared in her barn less than 2 months ago and turned her entire world upside down in the best possible way. The second day of the drive was harder. The cattle were restless, made nervous by a pack of coyotes that followed the herd at a distance, yipping and howling. Several times the cattle threatened to stampede, and it took all of the crew's skill to keep them calm and moving forward. Clara was riding drag with Sam, choking on the dust kicked up by 60 head of cattle, when her horse suddenly stumbled. She felt herself falling, had a moment of pure terror as she saw the ground rushing up to meet her, and then she hit hard, the breath knocked out of her lungs. The world spun. She could hear Sam shouting, could hear the thunder of hooves, and then James was there somehow, his hands on her shoulders, his face white with fear. "Clara, Clara, talk to me. Are you hurt?" She managed to drag air into her lungs, coughing and wheezing. "I am all right. Just had the wind knocked out of me." "Can you move? Do you hurt anywhere?" James's hands were running over her limbs, checking for breaks, his touch gentle despite the panic in his eyes. "I am fine. Truly." Clara sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her shoulder and hip, but fairly certain nothing was broken. "What about the horse?" "Sam has him. Looks like he stepped in a prairie dog hole." James helped her to her feet, his arm around her waist supporting her weight. "You are done riding for today. You will ride in the supply wagon with Timothy." "James, I am fine. I can ride." "You will ride in the wagon," James said firmly. "You could have been killed, Clara. I am not taking any more chances with you today." Clara wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. She realized that he was genuinely shaken, that her fall had terrified him in a way she had not expected. "All right," she said softly. "I will ride in the wagon." Relief washed over his features, and he pulled her into a hard embrace, his face buried in her hair. "I could not bear it if something happened to you," he said, his voice muffled. "I only just found you. I am not ready to lose you." "You will not lose me," Clara promised. "I am tougher than I look." "I know you are, but let me take care of you anyway." She rode in the wagon for the rest of that day and into the next morning, giving her bruised body time to recover. By the afternoon of the third day, she was back in the saddle despite James's protests, and they pushed hard to make up for lost time. They reached the outskirts of Laramie on the evening of the fourth day, the herd exhausted but intact. James rode ahead to make arrangements with the cattle buyers while Clara and the crew held the herd outside of town. When he returned an hour later, he was smiling. "I have got 3 buyers interested. They will come look at the stock tomorrow morning, and we will take the best offer." "What do you think we can get?" Clara asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of her voice. "With 3 buyers competing? I think we can get what you need and then some," James said confidently. The next morning the buyers came as promised. They walked through the herd, examined the cattle with critical eyes, and then huddled together to make their offers. Clara stood with James, her hand gripped tightly in his, and tried to breathe as the men deliberated. Finally, the eldest of the 3 buyers approached them. "We are prepared to offer you $3,200 for the lot," he said. "Cash money paid today." Clara's knees nearly buckled. $3,200 was more than she had hoped for. More than enough to pay the mortgage with money left over for supplies and to pay the crew and to see them through the winter. "We accept," James said, shaking the man's hand firmly. "You have got yourself a deal." The money was counted out. Heavy gold and silver coins that chinked into Clara's saddlebags. She could hardly believe it. Kept touching the bags to make sure they were real, that this was actually happening. They paid the crew their percentage, and Dutch and the others tipped their hats and rode off, wishing them well. Then James, Clara, Timothy, and the horses started the long ride back to the ranch, this time without the cattle to slow them down. That night they camped under the stars, and Clara lay in James's arms feeling like she could finally breathe for the first time in 3 years. "We did it?" she said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "You did it," James corrected. "You held on to that ranch for 3 years against impossible odds. I just helped a little at the end." "You did more than help a little." Clara turned to face him, her hand on his chest where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "You saved me, James. Not just the ranch, but me. I was drowning, and I did not even realize it until you showed me what it was like to have someone beside me instead of always fighting alone." "Then we saved each other," James said, "because I was lost until I found you. I had no purpose, no home, nothing to live for beyond the next day's work. You gave me all of that. You gave me a reason to stop running." They kissed under the stars, and Clara felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was love, real love, the kind her father had talked about, the kind that weathered storms and built futures. They arrived back at the ranch 3 days later to find everything intact. Clara rode immediately into town, marched into Martin Cresswell's bank, and counted out the mortgage payment on his desk with a satisfaction that was almost sinful. Cresswell's face turned purple as he watched the coins pile up. "This is not over," he said through gritted teeth. "You will slip up eventually, Miss Bennett, and when you do—" "It is Mrs. Cord now," Clara interrupted sweetly. "And yes, this is over. You will not be getting your hands on my ranch, Mr. Cresswell. Not today, not ever. Good day to you." She walked out with her head high, and when she reached the street where James was waiting with the horses, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him in full view of everyone on Main Street. "We did it," she said against his mouth. "It is really over." "No," James said, smiling down at her. "It is really beginning." Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November, but Clara and James barely noticed the cold. They spent the dark months working together, mending tack and fixing equipment, feeding the stock and keeping everything running, and they spent the long nights learning each other, building the foundation of their life together. Clara learned that James sang when he was happy, old songs his mother had taught him, and that he had a habit of leaving his boots wherever he took them off, which drove her crazy until she started to find it endearing. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and his eggs fried hard, and that he had nightmares sometimes about things he would not talk about, but that if she held him close, he would settle back into peaceful sleep. James learned that Clara was stubborn beyond reason and impossibly brave, that she had a quick temper but an even quicker forgiveness, and that when she laughed, really laughed, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. He learned that she loved to read but was too self-conscious to read aloud, that she mourned her parents still but could talk about them without crying now, and that she was terrified of thunderstorms even though she would never admit it. They grew together through that winter, two people becoming one partnership, one team, one heart. In January, Clara realized she was pregnant. She knew before she missed her monthly cycle, knew from the way her body felt different, the way smells suddenly bothered her and food tasted strange. When she told James, he stared at her for a long moment, and then he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying like he could not quite believe it. "Clara, we are having a baby." "Put me down, you fool," Clara said, laughing. "You are going to make me sick." He set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be resting? What can I do?" "You can stop fussing," Clara said. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Women have babies every day. I will be fine." But James fussed anyway, and Clara found she did not mind it as much as she thought she would. It was nice having someone worry about her, having someone who cared if she rested or worked too hard or got enough to eat. The baby was born in early September, on a morning when the sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara labored through the night with the midwife from town, and James pacing outside the bedroom door, and when the baby finally arrived with a lusty cry, the midwife placed a red-faced, squalling boy in Clara's arms. "A son," the midwife said with satisfaction. "A good, strong boy." James came in then. his face pale and his hands shaking. He looked at Clara, at the baby, and his eyes filled with tears. "Are you all right?" he asked hoarsely. "I am perfect." Clara held out the baby to him. "Come meet your son." James took the tiny bundle with the care usually reserved for handling nitroglycerin, staring down at the baby with an expression of such wonder and love that Clara felt her own eyes blur with tears. "He is perfect," James whispered. "He looks like you." "He looks like an old potato," Clara said, laughing weakly, "but he is ours and he is healthy, and that is all that matters." They named him Samuel, after James's father, and he thrived from the start, growing strong and healthy under their watchful eyes. The ranch prospered too. With the mortgage paid off, Clara and James were able to invest in improvements, buying better breeding stock and fixing up the buildings that had fallen into disrepair. 2 years later, Clara gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Margaret after Clara's mother. And 2 years after that, another son, who they called John after Clara's father. The house that had been so quiet for so long was suddenly full of noise and life and laughter. James proved to be a devoted father, patient with the children and endlessly creative in finding ways to entertain them. He taught Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, let Margaret follow him everywhere and help with the chores, and carried John on his shoulders as he made his rounds of the ranch. Clara watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, deeper and more completely than she had thought possible. This was the life she had dreamed of as a girl. Before hardship and loss had taught her to guard her heart, a home full of love, a partner who stood beside her through everything, children to carry on what she and her father had built. On Samuel's 5th birthday, the whole family woke before dawn and went out to the barn together. The children were excited, chattering about the party they would have later, the cake Clara had made, the presents waiting inside. But first there was the morning ritual that James and Clara had maintained through 5 years of marriage. They milked the cows together, the children helping in their clumsy way, spilling more milk than they collected, but learning nonetheless. And when the work was done, they all walked out into the yard, James carrying John, Samuel holding Margaret's hand, and they stood together as a family and watched the sun rise over the Wyoming grassland. "This is my favorite part of the day," Samuel announced, "when we all watch the sky get pretty." "Mine too," Clara said, looking not at the sunrise but at her family, at James with their youngest son in his arms, and their daughter leaning against his leg, at their eldest boy so serious and proud beside her. James met her eyes over the children's heads, and his smile was everything she had ever wanted. "Best part of every day," he said, "watching the sun rise with the people I love." Margaret tugged on Clara's skirt. "Mama, tell us again about how Papa came to the ranch." It was a story the children never tired of hearing, how their father had appeared in the barn one morning before dawn, looking for work and finding a family instead. Clara told it again now, with James adding his own embellishments, and the children listened raptly, even though they had heard it dozens of times before. When the story was finished and the sun was fully risen, they went inside for breakfast, a noisy, chaotic meal that was nothing like the solitary dinners Clara had eaten in the years after her father died. The house was a mess, toys and books scattered everywhere, muddy footprints on the floor, evidence of life lived fully and joyfully. After breakfast, friends and neighbors arrived for Samuel's party. Old Timothy, who still worked on the ranch despite his advanced age, brought a hand-carved wooden horse. Other ranching families brought their children, and soon the yard was full of games and laughter. Martin Cresswell had left town 2 years ago, his business failing, and his reputation in tatters after word got around about how he had treated Clara. The bank was under new management now, honest people who dealt fairly with their customers. The Cord Ranch, as it was known now, was one of the most successful small operations in the area, and Clara and James were respected throughout the county. As Clara watched James playing with the children, his laughter ringing out across the yard, she thought about that morning 5 years ago when he had appeared in her barn. She had been so close to losing everything, so tired and scared and alone. And then he had walked into her life and changed everything. "You look happy," said Sarah Whitman, one of Clara's closest friends, coming to stand beside her. "I am," Clara said simply. "I am happy." "You deserve it." Sarah squeezed her hand. "After everything you went through, you deserve all of this and more." Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the children were finally asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Clara and James sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out. It was late summer, the air still warm, and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night were familiar and comforting. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked softly. "Giving up your drifting life, tying yourself down to a ranch and a family?" James turned to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Regret it? Clara, marrying you and building this life with you is the best thing I've ever done. I was not living before I found you. I was just existing, moving from place to place with no purpose beyond surviving another day. You gave me everything that matters: a home, a family, a reason to wake up in the morning beyond watching another sunrise alone." "I love watching the sunrises with you," Clara said. "I do not think I will ever get tired of it." "Good, because I plan on watching sunrises with you for the next 50 years at least." James pulled her close, and Clara nestled into his side, her head on his shoulder. 50 years sounds perfect," she said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then James spoke again. "I was thinking we might expand the herd next spring. We have the grazing land for it, and Samuel's getting old enough to help with some of the easier work. What do you think?" "I think that sounds wonderful," Clara said. She loved that he consulted her on these decisions, that even though the ranch was legally hers, he treated it as theirs, a partnership in every sense of the word. "We could talk to some of the other ranchers, see if anyone has good stock for sale." "I will start asking around," James agreed. He was quiet for a moment and then added, "I want to make sure we build something that lasts, something we can pass down to Samuel and Margaret and John, something that will still be here long after we are gone." "We will," Clara said with certainty. "We have already survived so much, overcome so many obstacles, we can handle whatever comes next as long as we face it together." "Together," James echoed, and kissed the top of her head. "Always together." The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard winters when they lost stock to the cold, dry summers when the grassland turned brown, and they worried about water for the cattle. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls and near disasters. But through it all, Clara and James stood together, their love a constant foundation that held firm no matter what storms came their way. The children grew. Samuel became a fine horseman and took over more and more of the ranch work as he got older. Margaret proved to have her mother's head for business and her father's way with animals, a combination that would serve the ranch well in years to come. John was the dreamer, always with his nose in a book, but he loved the ranch as much as his siblings and worked as hard as any of them. When Samuel was 15, a group of rustlers tried to steal cattle from the south pasture. Samuel caught them in the act and rode hell for leather back to the house to get his father. James and several neighboring ranchers tracked the rustlers down and recovered the cattle with no one getting hurt, but it was a reminder that danger was never far away in the territories. "I want to teach you to shoot better," James told Samuel that night. "Not just for hunting, but for defending what is ours. The law is a long way away out here, and sometimes we have to be ready to protect ourselves." Clara listened from the kitchen and felt her heart clench with old fears. But she said nothing because she knew James was right. This was the reality of their lives, and their children needed to be prepared for it. When Margaret was 14, she announced that she wanted to learn bookkeeping and ranch management properly, not just picking up bits and pieces from her parents. Clara arranged for her to spend time with the accountant in town, learning the skills that would help her manage the ranch finances. James was so proud he could hardly speak, kept telling everyone who would listen about his brilliant daughter. And when John was 12, he asked if he could train to be a veterinarian, to go to school and learn the science behind caring for animals. It was a dream that would take him away from the ranch for years, but Clara and James encouraged it. knowing that having a veterinarian in the family could only help their operation in the long run. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Clara on a trip to Denver, leaving the children in the care of Timothy and their now considerable ranch staff. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their cattle drive to Laramie, and Clara felt like a young girl again, excited and nervous and giddy with the freedom of it. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, and James bought her a beautiful new dress that made her feel like a queen. But the best part was simply being alone together, talking and laughing and remembering who they had been when they first fell in love. "Do you remember that first morning?" Clara asked as they walked through the city streets. "When you showed up in my barn looking for work?" "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," James said, "and the most stubborn. I was not sure you were going to let me stay." "I almost did not," Clara admitted. "I was so scared of trusting anyone, of letting anyone close enough to hurt me again." "I am glad you took the chance," James said, pulling her close. "I am glad every day that you let me into your life, into your heart." "Best decision I ever made," Clara said, and kissed him there on the street corner in Denver, not caring who saw. They returned to the ranch, rested and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. And what came next was prosperity beyond anything Clara had dared to dream. The ranch expanded, the herd grew, and the Cord name became synonymous with quality cattle throughout the territory. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, Clara and James attended the celebration in Cheyenne, their whole family dressed in their finest. Samuel was 23 now, a man grown with his own ideas about how to run the ranch. Margaret was 21, sharp as a tack and already managing most of the ranch finances. John was 19 and preparing to leave for veterinary school in the spring. Standing in the crowd, watching the officials mark this historic moment, Clara felt James take her hand. She looked up at him and saw that he was watching her, not the ceremony. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking about how far we've come," James said. "From two scared people watching the sunrise together to this. Parents, grandparents soon probably, part of the foundation of a new state." "Grandparents?" Clara raised her eyebrows. "Has Samuel said something?" "Not yet, but he has been courting Emily Whitman pretty seriously. I give it 6 months before he asks her to marry him." James grinned. "And Margaret has that young lawyer from Laramie sniffing around." "My babies, getting married and having children of their own." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "When did we get old, James?" "We are not old," James protested. "We are just well-seasoned." Clara laughed and then sobered. "I hope they find what we have. I hope they are as happy as we have been." "They will be," James said with certainty. "We taught them how to love well, how to stand together through anything. They will be just fine." He was right, as usual. Samuel married Emily Whitman 8 months later in a wedding that brought together families from all over the county. Margaret married her lawyer the following spring, and John met a girl at veterinary school who stole his heart and convinced him to come back to Wyoming instead of setting up practice somewhere else. The grandchildren came in a flood after that. Samuel and Emily had 4 children in quick succession. Margaret had 3, and John surprised everyone by having twins. The ranch house that Clara had once walked through alone now rang with the laughter and chaos of multiple generations. Clara and James stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Samuel take over the main operations while they acted as advisors and extra hands when needed. It was strange at first, not being in charge of every decision, but Clara found she liked having more time to spend with her grandchildren, teaching them the things her father had taught her. Every morning, though, no matter how busy the household got, Clara and James maintained their ritual. They would rise before dawn, slip out of the house while everyone else still slept, and go to the barn. There were hired hands to do the milking now, but Clara and James did it anyway, side by side, just as they had that first morning 20 years ago. And when the milking was done, they would walk out into the yard and watch the sun rise together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about their children or the ranch or memories from years past. It was their time, sacred and unchanging, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge party. It seemed like everyone in the county came, filling the ranch yard with music and laughter and celebration. There were speeches praising Clara's business acumen and James's skill with horses, toasts to their successful partnership and their beautiful family. But the best moment came at dawn the next morning when Clara and James escaped the chaos of house guests and went to the barn as always. They milked the cows in comfortable silence, and when they walked out to watch the sunrise, they found all of their children and grandchildren waiting for them lined up in the yard. "We wanted to see what you see every morning," Samuel explained. "Why you never miss this no matter what else is happening." So they all stood together, 3 generations of cords, and watched the sun rise over the Wyoming grassland. The youngest grandchild, Samuel's 3-year-old daughter Clara, named after her grandmother, pointed at the sky with delight. "Pretty, Grandma, pretty!" "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is very pretty." James's arm came around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. This man who had walked into her barn a quarter-century ago and changed her entire life. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting, something worth all the struggles and fears and hard work. "What are you thinking?" James asked softly. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Clara said. "That I would not change a single thing, even the hard parts, because it all led to this moment right here." "Same," James said. "Though I might have skipped the part where you fell off your horse during the cattle drive. That took 10 years off my life." Clara laughed, remembering. "You were so worried. You fussed over me for weeks." "I still fuss over you," James pointed out. "I know. I love that about you." They stood with their family as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. This was the promise Clara's father had talked about, the promise of every sunrise. A new day, a fresh start, a chance to do better and be better. Clara had spent so many mornings alone, watching the sun rise by herself, carrying the weight of the ranch and her grief with no one to share it with. But then James had appeared, and suddenly those sunrises had become something shared, something special, a daily recommitment to their partnership and their love. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" James asked. "For staying that first morning, for asking to help milk the cows, for standing beside me through everything that came after." Clara turned to face him, not caring that their entire family was watching. "For loving me even when I was too scared to love you back. For giving me all of this." James cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle and reverent as it had been on their wedding night. "You gave me just as much," he said. "You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living. I am the one who should be thanking you." "Then we will thank each other," Clara said, and kissed him as the sun broke free of the horizon and spilled golden light across the land. Their grandchildren giggled, and their children smiled, and old Timothy, who had wandered out to see what all the commotion was about, wiped his eyes and declared it was the prettiest thing he had seen in all his years. The years continued to pass, each one a gift. Clara and James grew older, their hair turning silver, their steps slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. They were in their 60s when Timothy finally passed away, dying peacefully in his sleep after a long life well lived. The whole county came to his funeral, and Clara cried for the loss of the old man who had been so loyal to her father and then to her. "He was with us for so long," she said to James that night. "It does not feel right that he is gone." "He had a good life," James said, holding her close, "and he loved you like you were his own daughter. He would not want you to be sad." "I know, but I will miss him anyway." They hired new ranch hands to replace Timothy, young men eager to learn and work hard. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and Margaret's financial acumen kept them profitable even when cattle prices fluctuated. John set up a veterinary practice that served ranchers throughout the region, and his expertise saved them thousands of dollars in livestock losses. Clara and James spent more and more time with their grandchildren as they got older, teaching them about the ranch and the land, passing down the stories and traditions that had been passed to them. They took the grandchildren on trips to show them the mountains and the plains, to teach them about the history of the territory and the sacrifices that had been made to build the state. And every morning, without fail, they met in the barn to milk the cows and watch the sunrise together. Clara was 72 when she got sick for the first time, a fever that would not break and left her weak and confined to bed. James barely left her side, sitting with her through the long nights, reading to her and holding her hand and refusing to even consider the possibility that she might not recover. "You are not allowed to leave me," he told her sternly. "We have a deal, remember? 50 years of sunrises. We are not there yet." 51 years, Clara corrected weakly. "We passed 52 years ago." "Then we will go for 75, James said, "or 100, however long it takes." Clara recovered slowly, her strength returning bit by bit until she was finally able to get out of bed and move around the house. The morning she was well enough to walk to the barn, James cried, actual tears running down his weathered face as they stood in the yard and watched the sun rise together for the first time in 2 months. "I missed this," Clara said, leaning heavily against him. "I missed you and the cows and the sunrise. I missed our time." "I missed it too," James said roughly. "Do not scare me like that again." "I will do my best," Clara promised. They had another good decade after that. Years filled with more grandchildren being born, more celebrations and holidays and quiet moments together. Clara taught her granddaughters to cook and keep house, though she made sure they also learned to ride and rope and handle a gun. James taught the grandsons everything he knew about horses and cattle, but he also made sure they learned to read and figure and think for themselves. When Clara was 81 and James was 84, they celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary with a party that rivaled their 25th. The ranch was massive now, a sprawling operation that employed dozens of people and covered thousands of acres. The Cord family was one of the most prominent in Wyoming, known for their integrity and their commitment to the land and the community. But for Clara and James, sitting together at the head of the long table surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the real celebration was simply the fact that they had made it this far together. 60 years, James said wonderingly. 60 years since I walked into your barn and asked for work. "Best decision you ever made," Clara teased. "Second best," James corrected. "The best decision was kissing you that day in the kitchen after you agreed to marry me." "That was a good decision," Clara agreed, smiling. They were old now, both of them feeling the weight of years in their bones and joints, but their minds were still sharp, and their love still burned bright. They moved slower, needed help with things they used to do easily, but they never stopped working, never stopped being part of the ranch that had been their whole world, and they never missed a sunrise. Every morning, Clara and James would wake in the dark and dress slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces when arthritis made fingers clumsy. They would walk to the barn, leaning on each other for support, and settle on the milking stools that had been specially cushioned to ease their old bones. The hired hands would always offer to do the milking for them, but Clara and James refused. This was their ritual, their sacred time, and they would keep doing it for as long as they were physically able. When the milking was done, they would walk out into the yard, James's arm around Clara's shoulders, her hand on his waist, and they would watch the sun rise just as they had been doing for more than 60 years. "Do you remember that first morning?" Clara asked one day, the question she had asked 1,000 times before. "Every detail," James answered, just as he always did. "You were sitting on that stool, pressing your forehead against Daisy's flank, and you did not even look up when I spoke to you. I thought you were going to throw me off the property." "I should have," Clara said, laughing. "You were a stranger, a drifter. I had no business trusting you." "But you did trust me," James said. "You took a chance on me, and I spent every day since trying to be worthy of that trust." "You were always worthy," Clara said softly. "From that very first morning, you were worthy." They watched the sun climb higher, the light spreading across the land that they had built into something lasting and important. This ranch would go on after they were gone, passed down through the generations they had created, a legacy of hard work and love and determination. "I'm tired," Clara admitted, "more tired than I used to be." "I know," James said, "me too." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Clara spoke again. "But I'm not ready to stop yet. I want more sunrises with you. I want more mornings in the barn, more time to watch our family grow and prosper. I'm not ready to say goodbye to any of it." "Then we will keep going," James said firmly. "For as long as we can, for as long as we have, we will keep meeting in the barn and watching the sun rise together." "Promise?" Clara asked, like a child seeking reassurance. "Promise," James said, and kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. They kept that promise for 3 more years. 3 precious years of sunrises and family dinners and quiet evenings on the porch. Clara was 84 when she finally slipped away in her sleep one spring night, peacefully and without pain, simply not waking up from a dream about riding across the grassland with her father when she was young. James found her in the morning, still and cold in their bed, and he sat beside her holding her hand and crying like his heart was breaking, because it was. The funeral was massive. People coming from all over the state to pay their respects to Clara Cord, pioneer woman, successful rancher, devoted wife and mother and grandmother. They told stories about her strength and her kindness, her sharp mind and her generous heart. They talked about everything she had built and everyone she had touched. But for James, all of that faded into background noise. All he could think about was the empty space beside him, the morning ritual that would never be the same, the sunrise that would have to be watched alone. For a week, he did not go to the barn. He stayed in the house, surrounded by family who tried to comfort him and could not, because the only person who could comfort him was gone. Then, on the 8th morning after Clara's death, James woke before dawn out of habit and instinct. He dressed slowly, his joints aching more than usual, and walked out to the barn through the gray pre-dawn light. The hired hands had already done the milking, but James sat down on his usual stool anyway, in his usual spot. He looked at the empty stool beside him, the place where Clara had sat for more than 6 decades, and felt grief wash over him so strongly that he could barely breathe. But he sat there anyway, remembering that first morning when he had walked into this barn and seen her and known somehow that his wandering days were over. Remembering the way she had looked at him with suspicion and hope mixed together, the way she had slowly learned to trust him. Remembering their wedding day, their children being born, every triumph and tragedy they had faced together. When he finally stood and walked out into the yard, the sky was just beginning to lighten. James stood in his usual spot and watched the sun rise alone for the first time in 63 years. It hurt. God, it hurt more than anything had ever hurt in his life, but he watched anyway because this had been their promise to each other, and he would keep that promise even now that she was gone. "Good morning, Clara," he said softly to the dawn. "The sunrise is beautiful today. You should see it." He stood there until the sun was fully risen, and then he turned and walked back to the house. His family was waiting for him, worried about where he had gone, but when they saw his face, something eased in their expressions. "You went to watch the sunrise," Samuel said. "I did," James confirmed. "Your mother would have expected me to." "Will you keep doing it?" Margaret asked, "even though she is not here?" "Especially because she is not here," James said. "It is how I will talk to her, how I will remember her. Every sunrise, for however many I have left." And he did. Every morning, James Cord woke before dawn and walked to the barn. He would sit on his stool for a while, talking to Clara as if she were sitting beside him, telling her about the family and the ranch and whatever was on his mind. Then he would walk out into the yard and watch the sunrise, greeting her spirit in the dawn light. The family learned not to disturb him during this time, understanding that this was sacred, that this was how James kept Clara alive in his heart. Sometimes the grandchildren would join him standing quietly beside their grandfather as he watched the sky lighten, but they never interrupted his communion with his lost love. James lived for 2 more years after Clara's death, 2 years of sunrises and memories and a quiet contentment that came from knowing he had loved well and been loved in return. He was 86 years old when he passed away, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a book open on his lap, and a smile on his face. They buried him beside Clara on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. The gravestone was simple, listing their names and dates, and a single line that Samuel had chosen: "Together in dawn, together in eternity." The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's leadership and eventually under his children's leadership. The Cord name remained synonymous with quality and integrity, and every generation made sure to tell the story of James and Clara, the cowboy and the ranch owner who had fallen in love over morning milking and sunrise watching. And on special occasions, anniversaries, and birthdays and holidays, the entire family would gather in the yard before dawn. They would stand together, multiple generations strong, and they would watch the sun rise over the Wyoming grassland, honoring the tradition and the love that had started it all. The morning ritual of milking cows before dawn and watching the sunrise had been a private thing between James and Clara, something just for them. But it had become something more over the years, evolving into a family tradition that connected them all, a reminder of where they came from and what mattered most: love, partnership, standing together through whatever came, whether it was hard times or good times, grief or joy, working side by side, trusting each other, building something that would last beyond their own lives. These were the lessons James and Clara had taught through their example, and these were the lessons that their descendants carried forward into the future, generation after generation, ensuring that the love story that had begun in a barn before dawn on an October morning in 1882 would never be forgotten. The ranch stood strong through changing times, through wars and depressions, through droughts and blizzards. The Cord family adapted and evolved, bringing in new ideas and new technologies, but always staying true to the core values that James and Clara had established: hard work, honesty, respect for the land and the animals, and above all, taking care of family. And every morning somewhere on that ranch, someone woke before dawn and watched the sun rise, carrying on the tradition that had started so long ago with 2 people falling in love over the simple act of milking cows and greeting the day together. It was a legacy of love, built sunrise by sunrise, day by day, year by year, and it would endure for as long as the sun continued to rise over the Wyoming grassland, a promise kept and renewed with every dawn, a testament to the power of 2 hearts choosing to face the world together.